Hey guys, we're here to read chapter 17 of Things Fall Apart. The missionaries spent their first 4 or 5 nights in the marketplace and went into the village in the morning to preach the gospel. They asked who the king of the village was, but the villagers told them that there was no king. "We have men of high title and the chief priests and the elders," they said. It was not very easy getting the men of high title and the elders together after the excitement of the first day. But the missionaries persevered, and in the end, they were received by the rulers of Mibanta. They asked for a plot of land to build their church. Every clan and village had its evil forest. In it were buried all those who died of the really evil disease, like leprosy and smallpox. It was also the dumping ground for the potent fetishes of great medicine men when they died. An evil forest was therefore alive with sinister forces and powers of darkness. It was such a force the rulers of Mibanta gave to the missionaries. They did not really want them in their clan, and so they made them that offer, which nobody in his right senses would accept. So you can see kind of where this is going. The beliefs of the Igbo are that the evil forest is not a place that anybody would want to live. So they, to kind of avoid conflict with the missionaries, they offer it to them as land, thinking that they won't want it and that it will prompt them to leave. But of course, the missionaries don't have the same belief system as the Igbo, so to them it's just like a regular plot of land. They want a piece of land to build their shrine, said Ukendu to his peers when they consulted among themselves. "We shall give them a piece of land." He paused, and there was a murmur of surprise and disagreement. "Let us give them a portion of the evil forest. They boast about victory over death. Let us give them a real battlefield in which to show their victory." They laughed and agreed, and sent for the missionaries, whom they had asked to leave them for a while so that they might whisper together. They offered them as much of the evil forest as they cared to take, and to their greatest amazement, the missionaries thanked them and burst into song. "They don't understand," said one of the elders, "but they will understand when they go to their plot of land tomorrow morning," and they dispersed. The next morning, the crazy men actually began to clear a part of the forest and to build their house. The inhabitants of Mibanta expected them all to be dead within 4 days. The first day passed, and the second and third and fourth, and none of them died. Everyone was puzzled. And then it became known that the white man's fetish had unbelievable power. It was said that he wore glasses on his eyes so that he could see and talk to evil spirits. Not long after, he won his first 3 converts. Although Nwoye had been attracted to the new faith from the very first day, he kept it secret. He dared not go too near the missionaries for fear of his father, but whenever they came to preach in the open marketplace of the village playground, Nwoye was there, and he was already beginning to know some of the simple stories they told. "We have now built a church," said Mr. Kiaga, the interpreter, who was now in charge of the infant congregation. The white man had gone back to Umuofia, where he built his headquarters, and from where he paid regular visits to Mr. Kiaga's congregation at Mabanta. "We have now built a church," said Mr. Kiaga, "and we want you all to come in every 7th day to worship the true God." On the following Sunday, Nwoye passed and repassed the little red earth and thatch building without summoning enough courage to enter. He heard the voice of singing, and although it came from a handful of men, it was loud and confident. Their church stood on a circular clearing that looked like the open mouth of the evil forest. Was it waiting to snap its teeth together? After passing and repassing by the church, Nwoye returned home. It was well known among the people of Mabanta that their gods and ancestors were sometimes long-suffering and would deliberately allow a man to go on defying them. But even in such cases, they set their limit at 7 market weeks, or 28 days. Beyond that limit, no man was suffered to go, and so excitement mounted in the village as the 7th week approached, since the impudent missionaries built their church in the evil forest. The villagers were so certain about the doom that awaited these men that 1 or 2 converts thought it wise to suspend their allegiance to the new faith. And that detail in there just shows us that it's really hard sometimes to let go of all of the elements of your old culture when you are moving to embrace a new culture. And that would be definitely evidence that you could use in the essay that we're working on about the impacts when one culture overtakes another. At last the day came by which all the missionaries should have died, but they were still alive, building a new red earth and thatch house for their teacher, Mr. Kiaga. That week, they won a handful more converts, and for the first time, they had a woman. Her name was Nineka, the wife of Amata, who was a prosperous farmer. She was very heavy with child. Nineka had had 4 previous pregnancies and childbirths, but each time she had borne twins, and they had been immediately thrown away. Her husband and his family were already becoming highly critical of such a woman and were not unduly perturbed when they found she had fled to join the Christians. It was a good riddance. So the first woman who converts to Christianity has a pretty clear motivation for doing that, and that is that she keeps getting pregnant with twins. She's had 4 deliveries, each of them bearing twins, and she has had to dispose of the babies in the evil forest. And she's facing rejection from her family, including her husband, because they think there's something wrong with her that she keeps having twins. And so when she converts to Christianity, they don't care really, because they were thinking, oh, good riddance, it's good that we get rid of her. One morning, Okonkwo's cousin Amikwu was passing by the church on his way from the neighboring village when he saw Nwoye among the Christians. He was greatly surprised, and when he got home, he went straight to Okonkwo's hut and told him what he had seen. The women began to talk excitedly, but Okonkwo sat unmoved. It was late afternoon before Nwoye returned. He went into the obi and saluted his father, but he did not answer. Nwoye turned to walk into the inner compound when his father, suddenly overcome with fury, sprang to his feet and gripped him by the neck. "Where have you been?" he stammered. Nwoye struggled to free himself from the choking grip. "Answer me," roared Okonkwo, "before I kill you." He seized a heavy stick that lay on the dwarf wall and hit him 2 or 3 savage blows. "Answer me," he roared again. Nwoye stood looking at him and did not say a word. The women were screaming outside, afraid to go in. "Leave that boy at once," said a voice in the outer compound. It was Okonkwo's uncle, Ukendu. "Are you mad?" Okonkwo did not answer, but he left hold of Nwoye, who walked away and never returned. So that was like the straw that broke the camel's back for Nwoye and his father. He went back to the church and told Mr. Kiaga that he had decided to go to Umuofia, where the white missionary had set up a school to teach young Christians to read and write. Mr. Kiaga's joy was very great. "Blessed is he who forsakes his father and his mother for my sake," he intoned. "Those that hear my words are my father and my mother." Nwoye didn't fully understand, but he was happy to leave his father. He would return later to his mother and his brothers and sisters and convert them to the new faith. As Okonkwo sat in his hut that night, gazing into a log fire, he thought over the matter. A sudden fury rose within him, and he felt a strong desire to take up his machete, go to the church, and wipe out the entire vile and miscreant gang. But on further thought, he told himself that Nwoye was not worth fighting for. Why, he cried in his heart, should he, Okonkwo of all people, be cursed with such a son? He saw clearly in it the finger of his personal god, or Ch. For how else could he explain his great misfortune and exile, and now his despicable son's behavior? Now that he had time to think of it, his son's crime stood out in its stark enormity. To abandon the gods of one's father and go about with a lot of effeminate men clucking like old hens was the very depth of abomination. Suppose when he died, all his male children decided to follow Nwoye's steps and abandon their ancestors. Okonkwo felt a cold shudder run through him at the terrible prospect, like the prospect of annihilation. He saw himself and his fathers crowding round their ancestral shrine, waiting in vain for worship and sacrifice, and finding nothing but ashes of bygone days, and his children the while praying to the white man's god. If such a thing were ever to happen, he, Okonkwo, would wipe them off the face of the earth. Okonkwo was popularly called the Roaring Flame, fire association. As he looked into the log fire, he recalled the name. He was a flaming fire. How then could he have begotten a son like Nwoye, degenerate and effeminate? Perhaps he was not his son. No, he couldn't be. His wife had played him false. He would teach her. But Nwoye resembled his grandfather, Unoka, who was Okonkwo's father. He pushed the thought out of his mind. He, Okonkwo, was called a flaming fire. How could he have begotten a woman for a son? At Nwoye's age, Okonkwo had already become famous throughout Umuofia for his wrestling and his fearlessness. He sighed heavily as if in sympathy the smoldering log also sighed. And immediately Okonkwo's eyes were opened and he saw the whole matter clearly. Living fire begets cold, impotent ash. He sighed again, deeply. So this last part of this chapter, I think is really important. So I marked this because it reveals a lot about Okonkwo's character again. And I think that his interpretation and his perception of what's happening to himself and his family and the Igbo tribe is a little bit off. He is feeling like Nwoye is the cold, impotent ash. Of course, that's like a fire metaphor. So he's describing his son as if he's just worthless ash, like what comes after a fire. And the ironic thing is, I think that the reader knows that it's not Nwoye that is the ash, it's actually Okonkwo himself. It's as if his anger and his fury and his fear have been self-consuming and he's not even aware of it. So he is burning up and eventually he will be nothing but cold, impotent ash. So that is foreshadowing, of course, the end of the book. And one of the things that helped me realize that as a reader when I was reading this part was the fact that Nwoye is often associated with water. So that doesn't fit what Okonkwo's perspective is of Nwoye being ash. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, so that is it for chapter 17. I will talk to you guys soon and we will read chapter 18. Bye.